Welcome to Clean Plates, where every bite tells a story. I'm Brian Romaine, joining you on a culinary journey to understand the whys behind our diets and desires. Welcome to Clean Plates, where every bite tells a story. I'm Brian Romaine, joining you on a culinary journey to understand the whys behind our diets and desires. Joining me today is Nate Smith. Nate, how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent, Brian. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's my pleasure. I'm really excited that we get to have this conversation. You and I have had a lot of in-person reactions, and we've talked about a lot of the things that we're going to discuss today. And I'm just excited to dive into that because I think that the audience is really going to enjoy you personally as a guest.
Thank you.
So give me a little bit of a background on your relationship with food and who inspired you the most with food in your relationship with it.
Yeah, so inspiration, without me really knowing it, came from my grandma when I was young. So she was a baker and won the Pillsbury Baker of the Year award way back in the day. So every time I'd spend summers with her and my mom, like she would be cooking all the time. She wrote a cookbook, and all growing up, my mom would cook for us. She doesn't anymore, unfortunately, really cook for herself. But, at least when we were kids, like she would cook a lot. So I think it was just kind of ingrained in me from that level. And then my first job, quite a few high school kids, was in the restaurant industry. And I think it just ended up sparking like a curiosity. And I would watch like No Reservations with Anthony Bourdain and a lot of Gordon Ramsay stuff and all these things. And so that's kind of where my initial love of, I guess, like culinary arts came from. But I never saw it from like a health perspective, really, especially when I was that young. And then, decided after high school to go to culinary school and kind of pursue that. Thought I was going to be this great chef, and sort of long story short, ended up leaving that industry because it was taking me down kind of like a toxic lifestyle. And like concurrently though, through high school while working, and partying and kind of being like a degenerate kid, I was also an athlete. I was training a lot. And so after culinary school, I decided to that I needed to get healthy again. So I found athletics, looked at food from a whole new lens of nutrition rather than flavor. And so then the journey became this: how do I merge culinary art and nutrition? Because they're not mutually exclusive. And so often I see in the fitness world that, or at least there's like that mimetic that it's like, oh, healthy food doesn't taste good. And it doesn't have to be that way. So that's kind of that's the short of my food journey.
No, I love that. Where would you say was kind of like the, moment that you decided to start taking food more seriously with your career and things that, coincide with that?
Yeah, again, like as a chef, I was taking it seriously from that art form, right?
Of course.
Yeah, I was getting really burned out with that. And then I left, and I thought I wanted to just teach movement and like get into coaching. So went back to school for anatomy, phys, and all this stuff. And then very obviously you realize as an athlete, especially an athlete who's getting older or somebody who wants to train, like food becomes more and more important. Like the way you fuel yourself, your nutrition becomes more and more. It should always be one of the number one things, but just sadly, like that's not what we're taught growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was quickly evident that if I wanted to get the most out of my training, I had to like really pay attention to how I was eating. And then I wanted to, with my clients, offer. I was like, well, I'm a chef. I know how to cook. I know how to eat pretty well, I think. So I was like, well, let me pursue more training in this and actually have even more refined offerings in my coaching that go beyond just the physical, and beyond just like the precision nutrition stuff. Like so many coaches have that, which I have that. It's great. But like now like my interest is like nutritional therapy, and then merging that with like high level performance training or even rehab, and seeing how we can make that fit into somebody's lifestyle, because it can be such a challenging hurdle for people to change the way they eat. So that's kind of where my focus is lied. It's such a pillar of what we do.
No, I mean, absolutely. I always say that no matter how you look at it, no matter what box you put it in, you have to eat food. You have to nourish yourself somehow, whether you're doing it through things that aren't that healthy and you're just hitting a lot of dopamine receptors and you're just kind of eating for pleasure, or, you're eating for performance. But you and I have spoke about, and we just did, and you kind of went over it a little bit about how the two worlds of things tasting good and being nutrient dense and nourishing for your body can still live in the same world, because people tend to just you know put it into a category like you said earlier, that it's going to be bland, it's going to not really have any pop or zest to it. But that is totally not the case when it comes to things, when you take into importance of what you've spoken to me about, of these, tenets that you kind of have spoken to me in private about. And I'd love you to kind of share with people more of these kind of like the shelter, the water, the food, all the tenets that you now live by that you're teaching in another set of a community.
Yeah. So that all stems from so one of my other passions is like survivalist stuff, primitive skills work. So yeah, shelter, water, fire, food. And then if we were to extrapolate that out, so hunter gatherer, that's your four primary concerns. How are we going to sleep? Shelter's always first, and we can think about shelter in the modern context as our infrastructure. You can think about that as the way you treat your home, like your bed, all that kind of stuff, your lighting, like everything, that's your shelter. Like, how do we optimize that for health? And then water. Yeah, how do we optimize clean water? Are you drinking tap water with chlorine and all this crap in it? Or are you getting, really good spring water or filtered RO water with electrolytes, all those things? So shelter, water, fire being the next thing. And that's energy, like, from solar to heating to cooling. And the way I kind of think about it in the sense of like, I guess like a healthy lifestyle is like, that's our sauna, cold plunge, sort of like the thermodynamics aspects of health and wellness. And then in food being the last category, a hugely important one, but from a survival standpoint, it's like you can only survive so long without shelter. You can only survive a few days without water. And then like you need fire for warmth. But then food, it's like you can go a long time without food. And so that's why it's in that order. But yeah, food being like looking at so I break it down kind of into tiers, like wild and biodynamic food being the top tier. So if you can hunt your own food or gather your own food, or you're getting it from a farm that practices biodynamics and regenerative agriculture, like that's like pinnacle. It's going to be the healthiest stuff, locally sourced. And this is my opinion. There's evidence to back that up, but my opinion is like that's probably going to be your healthiest option. And then
I agree with that.
Yeah, then below that's organic. Organic's still really good, but it's regulated by the USDA. The USDA does not necessarily have our best interests at heart. They have their shareholders' best interests at heart. So even products that they use, products they use for organic grain and all this stuff, like it still has certain herbicides and pesticides that are questionable that are going to be on those things. And then you get into the conventionally raised CAFO farms, monocrop, GMOs, all that stuff. So it's not that like, I'm not a big fan of that at all. But if that's what you can afford, there's ways to navigate that space and, still get healthy food within those means. But working your way up that ladder and kind of voting with your dollar to get the better stuff, to teach yourself about how to acquire the better things and then support those farmers, hunters, foragers, whatever. Like that's really going to be your best option.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to also circle back on just the, people kind of using the term that if you're an athletic performer or you're somebody who is just active in general, that food has to be fuel, and
Mm,
it can't be just tasty and enjoyed as well as fuel and nourishing
yeah.
your body. So I think it's really important that you are touching upon that with people, because you're showing them both worlds, as well as you're giving them something that a lot of people yearn for in this world, and that's community. And that's huge. And I think that that also comes from a long history of having abandonment issues or other things of non community. For me personally, at least, I come from a history of alcoholism and drug use and partying, and just kind of thought that I was in a community of people that cared about me and cared about my well-being, but it was more caring about the good times we were having and at the moments we were having it. And I wouldn't trade some of those experiences for anything else, but I think you and I can both at least agree that coming from like a troubled life of partying and a
Mhm.
long, long history of it, that getting into a more healthy and kind of just like actually ingrained community of people that want to help, but for a way further, reason rather than just
Mhm.
the moment in time. And I just wanted to ask you how you feel about that personally.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's a community based on, I guess so. Like what we how I would frame it is like, what are your values, right? And it's like the values when you go into X community, whatever that may be, is going to sort of determine the outcomes that you get from that community. And we've spoken privately about it, but for the audience, like I alluded to it with like sort of like the dark path in the culinary industry. A lot of drugs, a lot of alcoholism. I ended up on probation, and I got into trouble. So those, some of those friends I had back then, when I stopped partying and stopped drinking, I stopped hitting them up because I knew, I'd hit them up a couple times in the beginning, and then it would just be the same thing. Like I'd be sober, and then they'd all be smoking and drinking and doing drugs and whatever. And they're like, "Oh, come on, man." I'm like, one, I don't want to, and two, I literally can't right now because I'm on probation. And the what I found so weird was they got offended by it. They were offended that I didn't want to participate. And I was like, why are you upset that I'm like sober right now? Like, why are you mad
Yeah,
about it? And so this is my own, maybe my own projection, but also a little bit of an observation is like, I think it triggered something in them that me choosing, and also like, it became a choice. Like at first it was forced upon me with probation, but then it really did become a choice where I was like, oh, I want to do this. I want to keep being healthy, being sober. My whole life got better. So like with me choosing that, I think it upset some of them because they were not choosing that for themselves. And so when I started to actually find a new community of stronger people, healthier people that were doing amazing things and, inspiring me and taking care of themselves, all that kind of stuff, I was like, oh, like these people care about me and care about actually having conversations with who I am. They don't care about like doing drugs with me. They don't care about the feeling state. And I think that's kind of what you were saying. It was like when I was in that other more, it was great times. I agree with you. Like I wouldn't trade any of that. It made me who I am. I learned so much about myself. But it was so much about the feeling. And it was because it was a very escapist culture. It was like, let's say, like we had to use all these excess things to become present. We had to use drugs and alcohol to express our feelings, express who we felt, right? And rather than people who could just use their physical bodies and their minds to stay present and to connect. That's something that I value a lot more now. And, I think we may derail a little bit if I bring this up, but I do think about how training and nutrition for at least a little bit became like a whole new addiction for me. I was just like trading one thing for another. I was just like all in on like eating super healthy and like getting jacked again, whatever. And I'm like, wait, I'm just like kind of using the same dopaminergic need that I had, but now I'm just applying it to like, quote unquote healthier choices. And so I think, I'm curious your thoughts on that. I'm like, maybe I come sometimes say I was like leveraging my addictive personality for something good, rather than letting it just deteriorate my body and my spirit and my mind and everything. But yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, for me, it was like one of those things where live music was kind of the plug to all of it. It was kind of the the introduction, because for me, live music for the longest time, whether it was at a music festival or at a concert or a series of concerts, because everybody does 2 and 3 night runs now. And, there's all this lingo that's involved with going to concerts. But the real deep part of it was doing drugs and drinking, because being super out of it and escape, like you were just saying earlier, an escapist community, it's like you want to, take acid and do mushrooms and eat Molly and keep perpetually drinking hard alcohol and beer. Because for me, I personally found there was these moments where almost everybody and everything went away, and it was just you and the band, and like you're just tripping and you're drunk and you're whatever, you're high on all sorts of just out of your body thought, that there's this moment that just seems to be all your problems are melting away, all of your issues are being dealt with. But the problem is that you get so deeply involved and you've got all this other shit going on in your life that when you come back to and you're completely sober again, not only is it pretty hard to recover after a certain age, like you just stop being so rubber bouncy, rubber bandy, just, oh, I, drank X and took Y and ate Z last night, but I feel great this morning because I just boot and rallied or like whatever, So for me, it was like, I thought that hanging out with people and going to shows and connecting with people kind of like meant something. And I found out very quickly that there's just a lot of people who are, I mean, I'm not like saying this as a whole, because I know that there's a lot of intelligent people that I've ran into in my life, but you just kind of realize they're just kind of dumb. Like the people are just like kind of not really, doing anything with their lives outside of these shows or these moments. And it's like, yo, you're 45 and you're doing cocaine with, I'm 23, or like, obviously I'm almost 34 now, but I'm saying like in my youth, I'm like, is this okay? Is this like, I guess like, let's go, like, let's, do like all the music, and you're just like in, and it's cool. It's cool. It's cool to go to live music. It's cool to know about these shows. It's cool to know what the ins and outs are of these bands and keep up with, going to these current places. So it's like, I just realized after a while that like it, it can matter to you if you, I guess, never have gotten in trouble or seen the other side of like what it's like to experience what you and I have, because I was myself on 5 years of probation for my DUIs, which I full-heartedly did and have no problem telling anybody that like I didn't drink and it's like I will always own up to my addictions, my, walk of shame, my humility. I'm all about it. It's just that like, when I went to rehab, I realized about 2 weeks in that I was supposed to be there. I was like, oh shit. Like, this makes sense. Like, I'm 29 and I've been doing this, for 10 years at this point, of just like nonstop, always thinking about the next moment, always thinking about the next party, always wanting to be a part of like that scratch that, just gotta have it, gotta go and gotta party, gotta go, 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 go. And I just realized that like, I wasn't connecting with anybody. I wasn't even connecting with myself. I was like barely scratching the surface of what community was because look, I understand that there are people to this day that have very positive influences and communities and other things in relationships with live music and stuff like that. And I'm not knocking that. I mean, I went to a live music show not 2 weeks ago, but it's like I have a different relationship with it now because it's like just so I just have so many memories of like the 83 plus days I spent in jail as a total, the 5 years I was on probation, the 4 UAs that I took a week for 5 years, all the money I spent being on probation because you have to, as you know, you can't just be like, oh, I'm not even gonna, I'm not gonna pay that. They're just like, cool,
go to jail.
you just buy. And so it just kind of like clicked with me after a while that this was the best choice to like stay away from alcohol. And then everything else kind of like followed suit. Like all the other drugs that I was doing just kind of lost their, zest, lost their touch. And I'm not saying that like, things like microdosing or doing, psychedelics on like the equinox or a few times a year or with your loved ones or in a controlled environment. Cause I am a advocate for that kind of recreational use. I am an advocate for that kind of reset because there was not all bad experiences with my drugs and alcohol. A lot of it was very enlightening. And I think a lot of it is where you get kind of a taste of the forbidden fruit and then you start eating multiple items of that fruit. And then it starts to just give you like a soul stomach ache or something like that. Cause it is.
Yeah. I mean, what you're really talking about is just like set and setting and intention. Right. And I'm sure you're very familiar with that. But for the audience, like set and setting being your mindset going into it, the setting, like a controlled environment. And maybe that is a concert and maybe it's the right dose and it's the right people. And you can, it can be a spiritual experience for some people.
And not knocking it.
Yeah. I got nothing against it. But again, it's how you do the thing and it's the intention you go into it with. If you decide to take a little bit of like a concert dose of psilocybin with people that are like all incredibly healthy, that live a healthy lifestyle. And then you do that once every 3 months at a show. And then the next day you wake up, you do your trail run and you lift and you eat a ribeye. Like, that's probably not the problem. It's when you're like, oh, let me eat the mushrooms. Oh, you've got Coke. Oh, let's take a couple shots together. Let's continue this. Oh, the next day, like who's playing tonight? And then, that vicious cycle looks very different than the person who has intention behind it. And then we can't, dismiss all the therapeutic benefits for anybody suffering with depression, anxiety, PTSD, like all that kind of stuff. So much value.
Today's episode is brought to you by SAPS. Staying hydrated is crucial, whether you're working out, working hard, or just going about your day. SAPS is not just any hydration drink. It's packed with electrolytes and essential minerals like sodium, potassium, and magnesium that help you rehydrate faster and more effectively than water alone. It's perfect for those hot summer days, intense gym sessions, hanging out with friends late night, the sauna, or even if you're just feeling under the weather. What I love about SAPS is that it's not loaded with sugar like many other sports drinks out there. It has just the right amount of sweetness and a refreshing taste that makes staying hydrated enjoyable. Plus, it's available in a variety of delicious flavors, so there's something for everyone. Whether you're an athlete, a busy professional, or someone who just wants to feel their best, SAPS has got you covered. And the best part? You can get SAPS delivered right to your door. Just visit sapsoriginal.com and use the promo code MEATMAN15 to get 15% off your order. That's sapsoriginal.com and use the promo code MEATMAN15 to get 15% off your order. So why wait? Hydrate smarter and feel better with SAPS.
I always think about, I don't know if you're familiar with Ram Dass or a fan of Ram Dass.
I have Be Here Now on.
Oh, perfect.
I mean, I have a copy of the really nice picture book, the version that has all the cool pictures and the spiral and everything. It was, he's one of my favorite people. God rest his beautiful soul.
Oh, he's the best. And, so his story in a nutshell, or not his whole story, but part of what he talked about was he was essentially addicted to the psychedelic experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he would always talk about he would always come up and he would be on these highs, and he was like, oh, but I would always come down again. He's like, I always come back down. So then he would take more to just stay up, stay high, and stay in that enlightened place. But as you said, it's like that forbidden fruit. It's doing is showing you a potential of something that already exists inside of us. Those states, those experiences, those ecstatic moments, that connection to something beyond us is already there. And that was part of Ram Dass's journey. It was oh, let's find this without the acid and the mescaline and all those things. Can we find this just within ourselves? And to kind of tie this back together, for us finding a community that's centered around holistic well-being, which is really what it is leading to that path, right? It's all about the foundations. So I think this really does come back to nutrition. I found that when I started really taking care of myself and I got the foundations dialed in, my blood sugar, digestion, sleep, stress, a nutrient-dense diet, those 5 things, and my training, when I started to lay that baseline, if I decided to have a psychedelic experience, all of a sudden it was 10 times more meaningful, And I also was the people that were around me were different. The whole situation was different. And then I also find that I really don't need to do it that often. I still do. I like how you brought up the equinoxes, solstice, something like that. Or, going into an intentional ceremony of some kind. Sure.
Exactly.
You don't have to do those things. Taking care of our base human needs, our biological needs, and doing that with community. You look at all the Blue Zone studies, community is the common through line, right? Such an important one. Community and a connection to something greater. And I think it doesn't have to be God. I'm not here to preach that at all. I have a lot of my own issues with religion, especially, but just connection to something. And I think that connection is formed through a strong community. And when you find maybe it's mountain biking and skiing or something that's taking you outside and getting outside, and you're using your body and you're problem solving and all these things, all of a sudden I feel that flow state and that grace and that presence that is so often desired when you're partying becomes a little bit more of a norm. And it also becomes net positive. It's you feel better after, not worse. It's the positive spiral rather than the negative feedback loop. So Yeah, I think it really does tie together. Personally, like I'm a huge fan of the word and the philosophy of consilience. And we might have talked about this privately, but consilience is the idea. It's like there's interdisciplinary thinking, and interdisciplinary thinking is like, hey, let's get a biologist and a mathematician and a quantum physicist together, and let's see how they could answer this one problem. So that's interdisciplinary thinking. Consilience is where it's the merging of all of our skills, traits, and knowledge into one consilient through line. Um, and that our Western education system doesn't really teach us to be consilient. It teaches us to be like, you have to use English to solve grammar or to like look at grammar. You have to only use math to solve a math problem. Like, and that's higher, really high order education. Like that doesn't serve very well when it comes down to huge problems. Like all of the great philosophers of antiquity, like they were all consilient. They were consilient thinkers. They didn't study philosophy. They studied botany and math and art and music, and then they created their philosophy came out of those things. It was born out of that. And so this is kind of like a long-winded way of saying like my philosophy, I guess, of life, my consilience for life has been born out of my love of music and nutrition and my interest in psychedelics and movement and all these things. I don't see them as separate things. I see them as one through line of like my human experience, my personal flavor of the human experience. And I, rather than like taking all these parts and then being like, oh, this is that, this is this, it's like, how do I actually bring this together into like a truly holistic lifestyle?
No, I mean, absolutely, because it is one of those things where I kind of look at it like a lot of different angles because I try to use the same energy that I put into all of the partying and all of the getting together with people and the gathering of the community for the, you know, whatever, and try to filter that into more of a healthier lifestyle with people because I kind of like feel the same benefits, if not in a weird, like yin and yang version of it. Because, like, when you have a tolerance to drugs and you can like do a fair amount of drugs without like getting sick or, being like weirded out by it, you kind of feel like you've like got a handle on something. But it's kind of the same thing when I'm like in the sauna and in the cold plunge
Yeah.
because I almost have like a psychedelic experience without having one
Mhm.
just by getting really hot and cold. And
Yeah.
that can only be something if I'm taking care of my body and I'm nourishing it with things and timing out when I'm going to have stuff. So kind of like what you said earlier is it's kind of funny because it was making me think it's like, yeah, once I got my blood pressure on point, once I got my, HRV kind of and like are more aware of it at least and dialed in with the nutrition that is the best for me, I started to feel this version of myself that was almost like damn near optimal because we all
Mhm.
know what it's like to be sick. We all know what it's
Mhm.
like to have the flu and feel like shit, throw up, all the above. But nobody's ever just like, oh, I am just so optimal right now. And it's like,
Yeah.
that's not a normal thing to tell
Yeah.
people because A, you probably sound really pretentious. And B, I don't know, people would know what the fuck you're talking about. And you're like,
Mhm.
optimal, what are you talking about? So it's like I look at it as a way of trying to always educate myself on things that are going to help me rather than hurt me because I'm not trying to borrow from tomorrow anymore. I'm trying to like live for right now and try to see what it's like to experience another 30 or 40 years comfortable and healthy And that all circles back with nutrition. And, honestly, it's astounding to me that more people don't go dive deeper into like what is going to nourish them personally the most. But that's for everybody to find out when they need to decide that.
Yeah, it's their own journey. Have you heard the dirty windshield analogy?
No, I have not.
So I'm sure you've had people in your life when you're talking about feeling optimal and you're like, wow, I actually, where's this guy been? That's how I felt like when I got like really healthy. I'm like, where's this version of my brain and body been,
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I've asked, there's so many people that, you ask them to make a change or you hint at it or give advice and they're like, oh, I feel fine. Well, the dirty windshield analogy is like you have all these bugs on your windshield and they've been there for weeks, months, and you're just used to driving like that. And you're like, I can see. My wife's like, clean your windshield. I was like, I can see fine. And then I finally cleaned my windshield, totally clean. I'm like, holy shit, I can see so clear out of my window right now while driving. And then as soon as one bug hits it, I really notice it, and that bug could be like you decided to eat a whole cake. Or maybe you stayed up. Maybe you stayed up too late,
Right.
or you decided to party or something. It's like, oh, I really noticed that bug now. I really noticed that impact, and that's like, it's not that being more sensitive doesn't mean more fragile, and I think that's an important thing. It's like I don't want to speak for you, but I know in my experience, when I got really healthy and cleaned stuff up, and then I ate something that like didn't agree with me, just because whatever it was, I'm like, oh my god, it's like I feel that my gut does not like that. Like I feel more sluggish, more tired, whatever. It's not that I'm more fragile. It's just that I'm more sensitized to the thing. I can really actually tell what's happening. Whereas before I was living in a perpetual state of tiredness and sluggishness and bloat and whatever. You just exist there. And so once you clean your windshield, now you really notice those changes happen. And it's also that for a lot of people, it's that positive feedback loop, that spiral of, oh, I don't like getting those bugs on my windshield anymore. I'm going to try my best to keep it clean. And I think that kind of lends itself to if you have someone in your life that they feel fine when you can observe their life and you can, you're like, I don't think you really feel fine. Like you can tell, but.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it makes me think of a few years ago when I was in the midst of quitting drinking and somebody just kind of noticed that there was like kind of just something different about my posture. And I was just like, wow, dude, it's not really that like I have like lower back, like it's just is what it is. And then my girlfriend at the time was like, yeah, there's like something weird. Like, I don't know. You just look like off proportion. Like, I don't know what it is, but like, and I'm not trying to like be too detailed about it, but I had a bilateral hernia that I did not know about. And when I finally got that fixed, it was like, I literally like my spine almost like grew back to like where it was supposed. Like I like got I got a sew right and started
Yeah.
stretching my psoas again and my back. And there was one day during the pandemic actually where I was stretching and there was just like this, like thank God I was the only one in the house because it was just like this almost religious moment of just like my
Yeah.
back going back and my hips and everything like going to where they're supposed to be. And yeah, the noise that came out of me was just like unhinging. But it's crazy because from that moment on, these last 4 years, I've really just learned more things about myself, about
Mm-hmm.
my nutrition, how I feel when I eat certain things. And now I actually know what it's like. Cause dude, I had digestion issues so badly for such a long time. It was so crazy when I finally found out like what's good for me to eat. And like when you do have a quote unquote good movement and you're like, it is like the Green Mile and when Tom Hanks gets his disease removed, he's just like crying with
Yeah.
relief. It's like, oh my God, dude, this is all that I needed to do was stop just, sorry to put in other word, pounding booze and then,
Yeah.
just like eating like crap and not taking care of myself or, it's like, who would have thunk? But
Yeah. Well, that and like what you're saying though is in practice so simple, in execution incredibly difficult because we're working with human psychology. You're working with coping mechanisms and also on the physiological level, blood sugar dysregulation and microbiome dysfunction. Like those lead to cravings. Those lead to us literally like basically being brainwashed by our own bodies and the bugs in our gut to be like, go eat this, crave this thing. You need more sugar, more of this, whatever. And it's not really us who has those things, which is for me, the way out of almost anything that has been bad for me is like, I'm a fucking nerd. So I just educate myself on it, on the experience. I want to know about the neurotransmitters and the microbiome and how nutrients are absorbed, like all that shit. So the more knowledge I had on it, the more empowered I felt to be like, oh, I know why I'm feeling X right now. Because it's this system, this like trail of these pathways are being activated, whatever. And that's very empowering for me. Not everybody cares to know all that stuff. And that's why, they seek out coaching or something like that. And, but even then, man, like I've had so many clients that they're paying me to tell them what to do, and yet they still have a very hard time doing it. Now, that could be a fault of mine. I maybe have to learn different ways of how to coach that individual person with like motivational interviewing, like different things like that. But it's also ultimately on that person. Like all I'm there to do is create accountability and offer resources. At the end of the day, like it's up to each one of us to make those decisions for the better. And yeah, you could go buy Primal Blueprint or fucking any one of these,
Brian Johnson.
yeah, any one of these diet books out there, like whatever. Yeah, you could go get any of that and you could read it and try and follow it. And you're like, oh, you're all excited about it for a week and then you fall off. And it's like, well, that's why we have to get at the core of everything. And when it comes to movement and digestion, everything, not just those two things, but for the sake of this conversation being about health, everything starts in your mind. Everything starts not in the brain, but in the conscious mind. Like I see mind as a layer above the brain. The brain is like the antenna that's like doing the work. It's the radio receiver sending the data out. But the mind is making the decision. The thoughts that are cruising through the consciousness, all decisions start there. And that we have to really want those decisions. We have to really, truly desire them in order to start making the changes happen. And it can be a much more challenging thing than simply just being like, yeah, all that food you've been eating for 20 years, just throw it away and change the way you've been doing it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I totally agree with you just because it's been a baby step process for me for the longest time. Like there's only been a couple of things that I've been able to go like super all in on, and it just takes time. It's like you said earlier, where you have all these people around you that are like so shocked or like mind blown that you're doing something A, healthy, or B, they're just like, I don't want to do that. Where like, as an i.e. example of like, people like, you put 20 pounds of extra weight on your back and then you walked up like Green Mountain.
Yeah.
Why do you want to do that? And you're like, because I did it with 50 other people and I was able to, conversate with folks the whole time and kind of get out of my head. And what do you know? It's like the workout isn't as hard when you're doing it with all these people and you get to chat the whole time about life and all these other things. Like it just feels good. So it takes time for a lot of people to accept that their habits are, their own version of habit stacking that they don't know they're doing because it's bad habits. It's
Mhm.
just it is what it is. So I mean, I've just kind of realized that as long as you surround yourself with more people who aren't mind blown or aren't shocked that you're doing something healthy and actually find it kind of like motivating and they want to do it with you or they want to learn more, that's the people I want to be around. And that's the kind of community of people I'm surrounding myself with, because nutrition and what I talk about on my podcast goes way beyond the plate of food itself.
Mhm.
Because, like, clean plates means having a clean plate. And it's also just an ode to my mother for having the clean plate award when she gave us food as a kid. And it's
Mm.
like, it's interesting that we were talking about earlier that, you're building this community. I believe in Austin, Texas is where these men's retreats are going to be at.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
You
so
talk, you,
cool. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. You're talking about the sacred hunting.
Uh huh.
Yeah, so I'm one of the leaders in it. It was started 4 or 5 years ago by a man named Monsell Denton. Monsel's become a really close friend, and so yeah, the goal with sacred hunting is to create a relationship to your food and a relationship to death. And death is a really taboo subject in Western culture. We literally box it up. We pour chemicals all over it. We trap it inside concrete and we bury it. And we don't want it to interact with the rest of the natural world. We have some really weird rituals around death when it comes to our loved ones. And we have very strange feelings and beliefs around other things dying. And I'm not saying it's not sad. Like, I lost my dad recently, and I'm a hunter, and I'm always feel grief and sadness when something dies. But I also know that it's fucking Lion King, dude. It's the cycle of life, like, or the circle of life or whatever. It's it's a real thing. And there just needs to be a level of reverence for it. So what we do in those events is we teach people. We put typically men. We do women's events now too, but typically men. We put them through a rite of passage with hunting. A lot of men have never been hunting, or even if they have, they're curious about hunting in a different way. They want to hunt with respect and reverence. They want to have a deeper appreciation for the food that they're getting. We're not doing any trophy hunts. It's all conservation based. So we only hunt animals that are overpopulating certain pieces of land that we're on. And then the people in that group get to go home. They hunt. It's also with a tribe mindset. So it's not just like, oh, I'm going to get this and this is my thing. If you got 6 dudes in the group, that one animal is equally shared between those 6 men who signed up for the event. So it's like a win for one is a win for everyone. And that also lends itself to that sort of community aspect, right? Like that tribal bonding, that brotherhood kind of feeling. And then having the feeling of both grief and gratitude that sit in juxtaposition of each other, but are, also simultaneously very related. I can feel both grief for the animal and gratitude that it's lending its body so that my body and my family can survive. And it's the oldest human practice, man. Hunting and gathering your own food is the oldest human practice, and it's not. I try not to get like triggered by vegans and that kind of stuff, and I see their perspective, like, not to cause suffering, but the fact of the matter is, like, if you are buying food from a grocery store, even soy, whatever, and it's all plant based, a lot of things died for that to get to the grocery store.
I have talked about it
Yeah.
a few times on my podcast about it because it's just a reality of the situation.
Yeah.
There's field mice and other rodents and other bugs and other living forms of life, whether you want to look at it however boxed up or not, that those large scale soy farms and those large scale almond farms and all the things that make all of the vegan and plant based products and all that, yeah, there's a lot of things that die because of that. So,
Well, and not just the small critters. Like it's not that they're this is a whole other esoteric conversation. This it's just because it's smaller doesn't mean its life is less valuable than a deer, right?
and that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But what I was gonna say is like there's deer and elk depending on where you are. But like let's look at like cornfields in Nebraska or eastern Colorado out in the plains. There's a lot of whitetail that get killed just for being on the farm and not eaten. They just kill them. You know, they're called land management tags, and they're like, oh, they're destroying our crops, so we're just going to kill them. And then that's not even used as food. You know, hopefully the ranchers do use the deer as food, but a lot of times they just get killed. And then beyond that, when you look at monocropping just as a practice, you're displacing hundreds, if not millions of acres of wild land for one plant, where normally that would have been thousands of species, thousands of different things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just like, to me, an absolutely insane practice. And we already know like permaculture and biodynamics, excuse me, have shown that there are so many ways to produce food at mass, but with variety, honoring a more ecological balance. So I'll give you an example. There's a beautiful documentary called Inhabit. And if anyone's interested in permaculture, they should watch this documentary. So I believe it's in Massachusetts. Don't quote me. It's been a little while since I saw the documentary, but there's a 1,000-acre corn farm, monocrop farm, right next to a 100-acre permaculture farm. And the permaculture farm has, I believe, like 40 or 50 different varieties of food, including animal products, dairy, and a lot of plant food. So they're growing fruits, veggies, they have cows, pigs, chickens, they got the whole thing. And it's 100 acres, so it's 10 times smaller. The university did a study by weight of food. The permaculture farm produced 40% more food by weight than the 1,000-acre farm. And not just, so they have by volume on 100 acres producing 40% more food and also 45 different varieties of food rather than one variety of food. So imagine if we took that 1,000 acres and you turn it into permaculture. Now you have this massive yield. And when permaculture is done right, human beings don't even need to be there anymore. It just becomes its own microclimate, becomes its own sustained ecosystem that just self-produces and takes care of itself because it has animals, bugs, plants, fungi. It has everything growing in synergy together. It takes a lot of work to set up, but we have the resources and the means to do it. So I'm a big proponent of that and a big proponent of regenerative agriculture to, I think, make longer lasting change in our environment that also provides food for people. And I know we derailed from the sacred hunting thing, so we can go back to that if you want. But
no, you're good. I mean, we'll be wrapping things up here in a minute. I'm really, really thankful that we've been able to touch upon so many subjects. I can't wait for more future conversations and have you on again and whatnot. But it's just so cool because I wanted to wrap it up by just saying that I think what you're doing in all facets is very good. It's very good for what we need as a community, and you're a huge advocate as well as like somebody that I respect very heavily for the words that, of course, man. I mean, the things that you share and the tenacity and the passion that you have for it is inspiring to me, and I think it is going to be inspiring to others as well. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on today and let people know where they can find you, where they can keep following you for more information to reach out to you.
Yeah, so best place is my Instagram. So it's Nate_P_Smith. And if you go to the link tree in my bio, there's going to be some links for all of my online programming. And then if you DM me, I have premium memberships that are private coaching. So I'll do one-on-one work with people who are in the Denver Front Range area. Also do one-on-one online, but those two things will look a little bit different. But yeah, if you want to work with me, check that out, or just go ahead and check out my page and yeah, give me a follow.
Awesome. Well, Nate, thank you so much for joining me. And I will be inviting you back very soon because we have so much more just to talk about in general. I want people to know more about the myofascial stuff that you're learning about.
Yeah.
And we'll continue to talk more about food and the sacred hunting. And just honestly, again, people, the message here is that the whole nutrient dense community that you can create with yourself, as well as reaching out and finding other ways to make that a thing for you, is important. Because just like we were talking about earlier, regenerative farming and supporting actual culture and permaculture for food means something. Because my grandfather used to grow tomatoes, and he would tell me all the time that the way that he grew tomatoes, for some reason, it was like there was extra carbon or extra just molecules in these tomatoes that when you eat store-bought ones, they were just trash. So it's just really, that just is a small example of just, reach out to Nate, reach out to those that you want to get healthy with, and, get it going, folks. Get it going. But everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a lovely rest of your week. And remember, stay full, stay hungry, keep your hearts full. Clean Plates. Thank you for joining me today on our flavorful journey here at Clean Plates. If you enjoyed our exploration into the world of food and the stories behind our eating habits, be sure to subscribe where you get your podcasts. And don't forget to share your own food stories on my personal page at Brian Waterleaf or the Clean Plates podcast page on Instagram. And remember, every plate has a story, and we are here to discover them together. So stay curious, keep exploring, and continue to nurture your relationship with food. I'm Brian Romaine, and until next time, keep your plates clean and your hearts full.